Here are the things that I regret pushing when I was a climate activist. So I regret pushing plastic straw bans because now I understand that I was radicalized by my social media newsfeed to think that a plastic straw ending up in a turtle's nose had something to do with my plastic consumption in New York City, even though in America we have very well-run waste management systems. And could it always be better? Sure. Is there litter? Sure. But it's not the norm, right? All of our trash almost essentially is going to a landfill or being incinerated. And so this idea that the plastic that I'm using is ending up in the ocean is not true. And so because of that emotional manipulation that I was put through because of my social media feed, I pushed banning plastic straws. And now we know that one, paper straws just are like less efficient product. They're just not as good of a product as plastic straws. And also the paper that they are made from, it's been shown to leak like forever chemicals, leach that into your drinking water. So I don't support paper straws, obviously beyond the fact that they're just annoying. And I think it's unnecessary policy. And I'm now more in the camp of we need less regulations and not stupid virtue signaling that does not move the needle on an issue anyway. I also regret pushing and promoting plastic bag bans. There's a plastic bag ban in my town. I find it to be so annoying because my paper bags always rip. And that's just annoying with two little kids to to have paper bags that rip. And I do bring my reusables. I try my best to bring my reusables, but sometimes I will forget them. And in the end of the day, plastic bags use much less material than paper bags. They're thinner, they're lighter, so they have a lower carbon footprint and environmental footprint than paper bags anyway. So again, virtue signaling for not a better cause. And also, people reuse their plastic bags. So they use them to line their garbage cans. They use them to pick up dog poop. And so now that we don't have plastic bags that we can reuse, people are buying plastic garbage bags, which cost them money and also doesn't even decrease the amount of plastic that we're using. I also regret pushing the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, which were in 2016. And that protest happened in North Dakota. And basically, this pipeline had been approved to transfer oil down for export. And I protested it because Native American tribes at the time said that it was like against their sovereignty to have those pipelines put in. And also there was like fear mongering that it was going to somehow like leak and destroy the water system, but that's also was not accurate when I learned more. But I was very emotional and easily manipulated at that time. And so I fell for that. And I actually made videos about Dakota Access Pipeline that got hundreds of millions of views. And I went there and I joined the protest. But then that protest left tens of millions of pounds of trash behind, and all the protesters then left and nobody cared. So it was just another virtue signaling, really manic protest that was only actually hurting industry, because in the end of the day, pipelines, transporting oil and gas through pipelines is safer than transporting it on trains, because trains have their own carbon emissions, but also because they can crash and it could be really dangerous. I also promoted the Green New Deal. I also made one of the first videos about AOC, and I really regret that because I feel that the Green New Deal was a really irresponsible policy. It was actually just socialism masked in the climate movement. It had statements like every person in America should have a job. We need to transition to green energy. I think it was by the year 2030. I haven't looked at it in a long time, so if I get the facts wrong, but basically it said we need to transition to green technology, our grid to green technology in 10 years. I laugh because that would actually be the most devastating humanitarian crisis in the history of the world if we were to transition our energy away from fossil fuels in 10 years. Millions of people would die, actually probably billions, because we're reliable on fossil fuels for not only our energy system, because it provides 80% of our energy, but also for fertilizers that fertilize our plants, for the plastics that are in everything from, plastic cups to our cars, to lubricants. Like, we can't actually live without fossil fuels. And so vilifying them was a huge mistake. So I regret that. And overall, I regret diving head on into a movement that really was emotional and black and white thinking. And the basis of that movement was that modern life is bad, America is bad, capitalism is bad. That was sort of the thrust of it, and that we were going to bring in a utopia by pushing all these green policies. Now I realize I was just manipulated by propaganda that made me vilify the very things that have made our modern lives so amazing. And so I wish I had not been so naive. However, I am grateful for my experience, because I realize now that my story is like kind of the story of the modern age of social media, where everyone's getting sucked into activism by their algorithms, and the way that those algorithms hook us in is usually an emotional story that plays on some level of guilt or shame or a desire to be good. And that definitely was the case for me. And so I fell for the movement full stop without really questioning it because of my own psychological makeup and desire of belonging. And ultimately I pushed harmful policies that were sold to me that they were good and ultimately created more harm than good. And I'm seeing now with a lot of the activism that's going on in the past several years, similar themes of people thinking that they're doing something good, but they're also ultimately pushing something that's really damaging to everyday people. And anytime I glazed for solar and wind, I regret that because solar and wind are really low energy dense energies. Technologies that take up way more land than, the comparable oil and gas or nuclear or hydro. They take up a lot of land. They're very expensive and their supply chains are dependent on China. So we are basically moving away from oil and gas, which are a form of energy that's very abundant here in the US, and becoming dependent on a trade system that is China, because China is the only one that does the rare earth minerals in the way that they do them because they're so freaking toxic and we would never let it fly here in the US. So we're trading reliable energy for unreliable energy that depends on China and also is exorbitantly expensive, like per kilowatt hour. It's just way more expensive than natural gas, and it can't run 24 hours a day. So it's unreliable because obviously the wind does not always blow, the sun does not always shine, and so you still have to have backup energy for solar and wind. And so they don't even lower our carbon emissions. They just make everything more expensive and more unreliable. If you watched until the end, thank you so much. Follow along and ask me all your questions and videos you'd like to see on my experience in the climate movement or what I believe now.